Welcome to the Cult of Domesticity podcast, a podcast about history, true crime, and whatever life brings us. I'm Courtney, and every week I am joined by another fascinating person. Let's see what we're going to talk about this week.
Welcome back, devotees. This week we have Justin from the Obscura True Crime Podcast, and
hello.
We're going to be telling each other some probably dark stories, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's going to get very dark, so grab a cocktail if you're at work. Don't show anyone that you're grabbing a cocktail. Heather was encouraging everyone last week, so it's up to you. Put it in your travel mug.
Yeah, if you're going to grab a cocktail, maybe don't show the boss.
Probably pick something that doesn't have a strong smell, or at least a distinct smell. So I'm going to go first. Justin, have you heard of John Akroyd?
No, I have not.
You're in for disappointment in the system and rage. Just lots of it.
I'm ready to be disappointed.
Because of a lot of the themes in this, I'm pulling from, it's called Ghosts of Highway 20. It's put on by the Oregonian, and I'm gonna share that as well. And they really suggest, and as do I, because if you've experienced sexual violence and need support, contact the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE. So if this is triggering to you, don't listen. This is it gets bad in some points. And specifically, I want to thank the author, Noelle Crombie, because she spent over 2 years doing research and reaching out to people to get this story out there. And she did an amazing 5-part series, which included basically a documentary style film on YouTube, which I'll be sharing. And it made me angry. It broke my heart and made me cry, which is really hard to do. So I suggest going and supporting the Oregonian. They did amazing work. We're going to follow this crime by actually the victims. So we're not going to focus on this asshole.
So you might want to put that warning, that trigger warning, pretty much on the entire episode, not to spoil what comes later, but,
Yeah.
On pretty much the entire episode.
Just underneath, just the giant flashing red trigger warning. Okay, so the first victim was Marlene Gabrielson, and her attack site was in the Sisters. So for those of you who've never driven in Oregon, have you, Justin?
No, I have not.
Highway 20 basically follows the length of Oregon in the middle. So it goes from Newport all the way out to the edge of Idaho, I believe. I don't believe I've driven along that road, but I've driven many roads like it. It is very rural. It is windy in the mountains, and it can be very isolating. It's like a 2-lane highway. So in 1977, Marlene had just had a baby 3 months before, and in late spring, her and her husband planned to spend the night at Sisters Rodeo. So she got all dressed up, and I think this is very key. You put on your clothes, and she was wearing her buckskin boots that her husband bought her, even though the couple couldn't afford them. So they're not a wealthy couple. She is a Native American from Alaska, which kind of, when you see what happens, explains a little bit and causes rage.
Yeah.
So they drove 90 miles from their home in Lebanon and set up camp at the rodeo grounds, drinking beer, having fun with their friends. Her and her husband disagreed because he wanted to head off with a couple of friends. She did not. She was only 20 at that point, and she was like, you know what? I want to go home to my baby. She's only 3 months old. I'm going to go home. However, it's around midnight in rural Oregon, so dark, not a lot of people around. So she's looking for a ride back, and she doesn't manage to find one on the road because she's planning to hitchhike. But when she returns to the campground, a stranger said that his buddy, John Akroyd, could give her a ride because they were going out. So she's like, okay, yeah, I'll hop in. It's the 70s. People hitchhike.
Yeah, absolutely they do.
So they go on. Akroyd drops off his passenger. Marlene kind of notices that he has to reach through the open window and unlatch the door from the outside. He then rolls up the window and shuts the door. Yeah, there's no way to exit the car from the inside. Yeah. So Then Marlene's alone with Akroyd, who she said a big man who reeked of sweat and freshly cut wood, and she falls asleep. Again, not the best idea, but she's 20 years old, just had a baby, and has been drinking, so, she's tired. However, an hour into the drive, Akroyd has turned off the highway and onto an old wagon road. And let me tell you, these roads are everywhere. Like, even now, there's old logging roads and stuff like that just pull off. You don't know where they go. It's creepy. Marlene is awoken by someone grabbing her legs as she's dragged out of the truck. Again, not how you want to be woken up. And then she feels Akroyd's blade hunting knife against her neck. He tells her, quote, "You're going to do what I tell you," end quote. He then rips her jeans off with such force that her pants split from the waist to the ankle along the inseam. He slices off her boots, the very ones that they couldn't afford, her underwear, and threw her to the ground. So now she's naked in the woods. He rapes her repeatedly. Afterwards, he cleans off his knife on his jeans, and he glanced around the dark woods saying, quote, "I'm not sure what to do with you." And she responds, "You could take me home." He doesn't know if he's sure if he wants to do that. And she says, quote, "I have a baby that's not even a year old. Please take me home," end quote. So she convinces him to take her home. He gives her a dirty pair of plaid pants, because remember, he's torn all of her clothing, either by force or with a knife.
That's horrifying.
I know. And the documentary has her telling her story in her own words, and it breaks your heart. So Akroyd has the audacity to stop at the house that he shared with his mother in Sweet Home because he needed a soda and to use the bathroom. I know. Marlene is petrified in the truck. She, in the words of her in the documentary, "I held everything in because I wanted to get him. I wanted the police to get him." So he returns. She's like, "Can I get your phone number? Maybe we can see." And he goes, "Maybe we can see each other again." She wants the phone number to be like, "This is the man who did it," hand her rape case to the police wrapped up in a bow. He drops her off in front of her mother-in-law's house in Lebanon. And as soon as she gets out of the car, he drives off. She is banging on the door. She looks horrible. She's been raped in the woods. Not great. She forces her mother-in-law to call the police. So they go and they do the rape kit and everything. Akroyd goes and tells the police that Marlene had seduced him in the front seat of his dirty truck. He gave her a pair of pants because she tore hers while taking them off. I don't know any woman who's torn her pants from with your inseam.
No, that's absurd.
Oh my god, yeah. So, the other man who was in the car that night said, Akroyd is not the violent type, and she was drunk. Good to know. Thanks. So, she handed over her clothes. In the hospital, they had noted that she had scratches on her back. The doctor noted the bruising on her back, legs, and knees. Police still don't believe her, so they both agree to be polygraphed, because we all know that's great. He passes, so they ask... And they go to ask her questions like, did you tell the truth about being raped? Did you feel she'd been raped? Was there a question she feared to answer? You can't see my face right now, but it's angry and judging a lot. And Justin, do you want to guess the sergeant's conclusion?
Well, considering they made the documentary, I'm going to assume that he concluded that she wasn't raped.
Yes, with no explanation. Meanwhile, Akroyd's questions were, did the girl ask you to pull over and have some fun? He said yes. Did you force her to have sex at knife point? Did you have a knife in your hand when you had sex? Did you tear off her bra? He answered no. And the lie detector concurred with him. So, and the district attorney, I love this, a single handwritten sentence said Akroyd would face no charges.
And this is really not that uncommon for a case in which the local police force sees the victim as a lesser victim, because I recently did an episode on Brandon Tina, and in that case the way they questioned him was absolutely horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying, and all because they saw the victim as like a lesser victim, and the rapist in this case as a good old boy. And it sounds like kind of a similar situation to what you're talking about. Yeah,
she's lesser than because she's Native, she's a woman, she was drunk, and you're just sitting there like, Are you kidding me? That was in 1977. Akroyd has no charges. He works for the Oregon Highway Patrol, so he works for our Department of Transportation, so ODOT. Just remember this, because his route is on Highway 20. So, the next year, we're going to talk about Kay Turner in 1978. So, it's Christmas Eve day, and she steps out. She had just gotten into that year into running marathons. She loves running. It's 8 a.m. in Camp Sherman, Oregon, along Highway 20. She planned an 8-mile run. Oh my God, kill me before I do an 8-mile run. But she planned to be back in an hour in time for breakfast. God bless her. If I did an 8-mile run, you'd have to look for me, because I would probably be, like, walking. Her and her husband, Noel, had joined their friends for the holidays at Camp Sherman. She had been running a little bit when a highway worker, Thomas Hanna, had spotted her running south alone, and he was returning to Camp Sherman after working the night shift. He passes then another highway worker, John Akroyd. Somewhat a theme, you would say. By 10 a.m., remember she left at 8:15, Kay hadn't returned. Her husband starts looking for her, their friends start looking for her, they panic and call the police. Well, our good friend Akroyd's name comes up early because the other highway worker, Hannah, said, I had seen him that morning. Justin, you want to guess what Akroyd says to the police?
That he wasn't there?
He wasn't that blatantly lying. And mind you, this is 2 weeks later. He doesn't volunteer this.
I figured he'd just try for anything considering, the last time.
He goes, I did come across her, but I didn't go to the police, because I just drove past her. He'd only been working for the highway department for a year. He was 29. He basically was the middle child of 3. In school, he earned low grades. His high school diploma was marked special education. He was a loner who was bullied and beaten by classmates. This doesn't excuse him, because there are people who are bullied and beaten. Don't murder. That's a key thing. Don't.
Absolutely. That's one of those excuses you see come up a lot in true crime. There's a lot of cases where somebody has this grand excuse for why they're horrible people, and it's like a good majority of us go through a lot, and not all of us end up killers and rapists.
So, because he was accused of a felony theft as a teen, he was like, I'm going to go into the army, because that solves everything, and was stationed in Korea, Thailand, and Germany, where he learned to be a mechanic. He was not great in the army. They investigated him for selling marijuana and going AWOL, and he was caught trying to steal equipment and supplies. So he's always been a gem of a human being. They even said early on he showed signs of a disturbed mind. Justin, do you want to guess which part of the McDonald triad he showed? We got the head injury, bedwetting, cruelty to animals.
Let me think here. Cruelty to animals, if I had to guess.
Ding, 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 we have a winner. So an acquaintance told a detective how he once watched in horror as Akroyd, as a child or young man, hacked up puppies using a machete, saying the dogs were his and no one else could have them. He is a horrible person.
Oh my God.
So he returns from Korea in the army. He got a state job at ODOT. He got positive reviews, even though they noticed his occasional laziness and frequent time requested off. So he goes and tells the detectives after he's asked about it. He said he was based in Datham Junction, about 25 miles from Camp Sherman, which out there, it's decent, but you gotta have a reason to go do things, because let me tell you, if you're gonna go get gas, you gotta make sure you have a purpose. You're gonna go get gas, get groceries, get other things, have fun. You're not going out for like a little joyride normally. It's very different from the Midwest. Let's put that out that way. He had gotten off work at 6:30 a.m., dear Lord, and he was driving through Camp Sherman, and he was planning to hunt coyotes, as you do. He passed the runner, and that was it. They were like, okay, we're gonna focus on the husband, because normally that's who does it, because she had disappeared, and she had 2 affairs at the time, which, damn girl, that's a lot of work.
I'm going to refrain from comment on that one.
A lot of coordinating, 3 men in your life, plus a job, plus running. God, how do you find the time? Disturbingly, the next day after Christmas, so Boxing Day, 2 experienced trackers who had been part of the search discovered some tracks of 2 sets of footprints preserved in the frozen ground. Because remember, Oregon, winter, cold, mountains. One of them resembled Kay's Nikes, and they were with another set that appeared to belong to a large man. There was indication of a scuffle, and looked like the large person was dragging a smaller person away. Let's get ready for our second marker of rage. Local police did not put much stock in the tracker's findings. They were told to drop it. We all full of rage yet?
And that's, with local police, that's really not that uncommon as well. I worked on a podcast episode not long ago where I had family members reach out to me and tell me, I know this is the person that did this. He's bragged about doing it, etc. And when I've personally reached out to the police force, they basically have told me point blank, yeah, we're not looking into it. It's just not on our priority list. And that's just the end of it.
I should mention, have you heard of the case where there was those 2, it was either 2 girls from Harvard or Yale, and they were traveling cross country, and someone attacked their camp with a hatchet in Oregon?
No, I haven't heard of that.
My favorite murder covers it in it's very upsetting. This is a year after that as well. So that was the big fear, is there another madman on the loose? Is it the same person? But after the police ignored that, 8 months later, in August, Akroyd walks into the Camp Sherman store, and he looks very concerning. And he announced that he had found Kay's remains in the woods nearby while hunting rabbits with his dog. And I enjoyed this. It was not a likely choice area for spotting rabbits, but he was there hunting rabbits, as you do.
Guess he was out of coyotes.
I know. Just go through all the animals. This is when you want a cougar to find him. The shopkeeper, Christine Weston, recognized him because he had been in half a dozen times since Kay had gone missing. One specific visit stood out because she had discovered him fondling himself while looking at porno in the store, and she had gone to get her husband because there's some dude touching himself in the store, and he had fled. So, again, gem of a person.
Sounds like a real social butterfly.
I know. And then he said, so he comes in and goes, I found the body. He tells them, quote, I'm in real trouble. I was the last one to see her alive, end quote. Why would you say that? So he leads the investigators into the brush about half mile off the road from where Kay had gone running. And he kept telling the Oregon State Police Trooper Clayton Durr in 1979, why did I have to find her? Well, probably because you murdered her, but okay. They were kind of confused on how he determined that it was Kay, because there were bits of clothes and bone. It looks like trash and animal carcasses. So how is that Kay? He's just putting himself in there so much. They spent another week looking for her remains. They found her lower jawbone and yellow short, some scrap from her pullover, her underwear, remnants from one of her Nikes. They found the other sneaker and her gold Timex watch, and it actually stopped on the time that she was murdered. Do you want to guess how long into her run?
Oh, wow. 40 minutes?
A little longer. It stopped at 9:27 a.m. So about an hour or so into the run. Creepily, one of the state troopers rested against a tree, and he looked upwards, and he discovered there was a bird's nest. Something was tangled in the twigs and sticks. Kay's blonde hair.
So did she try to climb up the tree?
No, the birds like hair for their nests because it's good to weave in there. So they had...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
something that'll haunt your dreams now.
Oh, that's pretty crazy.
So guess who's the number one suspect? Mr. Akroyd.
So he actually showed up on their compass there this time. Yeah.
Mainly because he found the body and they were like, how did you know this was a body? It doesn't look like a body. Anyone who walks in the woods and stuff wouldn't be like, oh, maybe it's some trash. I found some weird things in the woods for work. Things that will haunt me. But that's besides the point. when you have to clean up the things people throw off the path, it sucks. Let's put it that way. Really a lot of dog poop bags. Just carry them with
awful.
you. Just carry them with you. There's a garbage can somewhere. You have the dog. Or at that point, why even put it in a bag? I digress.
That's just adding plastic.
I know. So many. All colors. So now, Akroyd admits that he had stopped and talked with Kay. So he's already changed his story. He keeps adding incriminating details. The best one is, he's like, no, I had seen her body 2 months after her disappearance, but I didn't think about calling the cops. Really? You didn't? Okay. He said it was in the area where her body, the bones and the bits of clothing were found. Her breast had been punctured by a bullet and her throat was slashed. And he reached down to touch the slain woman's arm and hair. Why? Why would you do that? And basically, what does this look like, Justin?
What do you mean?
What do you think? Like, if he's he's like, I found it 2 months after she disappeared. Like,
well, considering the last few police officers or the last few investigators, they seem to just brush it off. Who knows what they thought this time?
no, doesn't it seem like Bundy? Didn't he say he used to go back and like visit? He's like visiting her.
Oh yeah, no, that's absolutely common. You see that all the time. Yeah, revisiting the scene of the crime. Yeah. I mean, that's classic behavior. You know, and if they're not, collecting items from their victims.
Well, I think they said they only really found her skull, but they found like the skull and the mandible separated because animals think that's fun.
Well, another person that used to revisit the scene of the crime, Gary Ridgway, they would find, the bodies sometimes the body parts sometimes miles away from each other, because what Gary would do is he would return and he would intentionally, misplace different body parts, from where they were murdered and just kind of scatter them across the woods to make it harder on investigators. So, it's really, it can be animals, and sometimes it can just be, whatever the hell's going on in their head.
The asshole. And let me tell you, those woods, I've hiked in some of them. It's easy to get lost. I sometimes regret it because I was always by myself going hiking because cougars, bears, forgot about the bears before I moved out there, but that's besides the point. So, on top of it, Akroyd goes, I wasn't alone on Christmas Eve morning. So yeah, someone else was there and didn't say shit. Good old cup of rage right now. So, he was with his friend and hunting companion, Roger Dale Beck. They said they hunted coyotes, but later changed their story to say they were poaching deer. Pick one.
One crime for another.
I think people give less fucks about killing coyotes. I do. But that's just because they'll attack dogs and stuff. Deer are just horrible when you hit them with your car. So, yeah, like you said, Akroyd is kind of a stereotypical serial killer, or murderer. He's placing himself in the crime scene area. He's putting himself in the investigation. He's clearly gone back and visited the crime scene, but because of how much time has passed, there's no physical evidence. So, and he's like, I'm innocent, guys. I had only seen her that morning and found her remains. How weird. How weird. So, the detectives really feel like it's BS, but what are they gonna do? Time passes and it stalls out. So,
in what year? Around what decade was this?
Late 70s. So he started in 77 that we know of, and they found Kay's body in 79.
It also just seemed so much easier to get away with this stuff at that time. When you look at the charts and you look at the amount of active serial killers, in comparison to today, I mean, a lot of it had to have been that they were just, having open season, because the fact that they weren't, taking a look at this guy's past and his relation to his other potential crime, it's just mind-blowing to me.
I think it's small rural communities in Oregon, and at that point they're not talking a lot, so it's easier to get away with shit.
Yeah, less databases kind of linking the various potential crimes. Yeah.
So he continues working for the state, and he marries a woman named, where is it? I hit my computer. He marries a woman named Linda, and they lived with her young kids Byron and Rashanda. Meanwhile, his co-conspirator Beck left Oregon. He was convicted of a sex crime in Minnesota and served 7 months in prison and then moved to California. Yay! Great.
And what level of a sex crime did he commit to only get 7 months?
I'm assuming it was probably, sounds bad, rape, but think about it, it's the late 70s, you're not getting that much. Yeah.
No, I mean, they still get a tap on the wrist sometimes nowadays.
So his next victim was Rashanda Pickle from Santam Junction in 1990. So this is when she was 13, and her stepfather had a very quick temper, and his name was John Akroyd. Yeah.
Oh, wow. And is that a coincidence or any relation?
No, that is the John Akroyd we've been discussing. He just married her mother.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, he married her mother, so it's like they had a different father. And Akroyd was basically very physically abusive. They interview, in the documentary series, they interview Byron, and he really, and her friends, and it's not a pretty picture that they paint about John. So, coincidence.
Yeah, the way that it was framed, I was like, wow, that's an amazing coincidence.
2 John Akroyds. I barely know one. Yeah. So this is basically where the State Highway Division compound was at Santam Junction. It's where US 20 and Oregon 22 meet. So basically right along John's hunting grounds. So in the work crews called the Junction Home, there were couple kids that lived there. So John's relationship with Rashanda's mother, Linda, was really interesting because they had married in the mid-90s, but divorced the year later, still living together, raising Linda's 2 kids. Rashanda was the younger one of the 2. She was a good kid, helping around the house, not really going too far. She would ride her bike, took the bus to school. She listened to Debbie Gibson and Wilson Phillips, and got along great with her brother, who was really her protector. Her family called her Channy. Don't know why, but that's what they did. Then there was a shift when she reached 5th grade. She seemed withdrawn and tired, and she seemed to dread when school ended. What do you think is happening, Justin? If you could guess.
Well, I can imagine what's happening considering her stepfather.
Yeah. Get ready to refill that cup of rage. So she confided in 2 girls who were sisters who she was friends with. She was terrified of returning home alone. She would always be like, can I stay over? Can I stay over? Can I stay over? And these girls, the reason why she confided with them is they were survivors of sexual assault and molestation. And they knew that Akroyd was at least molesting Rashanda, if not going further. So really what strikes the tinder in this situation is Rashanda and Byron went to stay with their biological father, and he figured out what was up, and he was planning to fight for his kids. And he told Linda. Linda told John. Can you imagine how happy John was about that?
I can't imagine very happy.
No, he seems like someone who could handle this stuff well. On the morning of July 10th, 1990, Rashanda woke early to help her mom get ready for the day. And Linda and John left for work, and leaving Rashanda with a list of chores, and they weren't expected back till that afternoon. So they left probably pretty early, and, stereotypical chores, but John came back early, and Rashanda was never seen again. Yeah.
That's horrible.
It's gonna sound bad. It's a great way to get rid of evidence, I guess. Yeah. And you want to hear a story that he told everyone?
What did he say this time?
He said he dropped Linda off at the resort and continued on east on Highway 20 to the state maintenance shop in Bend, Oregon. He planned to fix snowplows, but then decided to take the day off after learning the parts hadn't arrived, a claim that baffled his supervisor, who was like, we got plenty of shit to do. So instead, he returned home to find his stepdaughter under a blanket on the couch. She was watching TV. He was like, I'm going to go for a drive to photograph some deer on the back roads. Who photographs deer? I don't know. I've lived in the country. No one wants to photograph deer. Just a thought.
Plus, what is it with this guy and deer?
Easy excuse. I should mention these are black-tailed deer. of the Pacific Northwest, not white-tailed deer like the Midwest and the East Coast are used to. I had to learn about them. Fun facts. And Roshanda was like, no, I gotta finish my chores. And he says he left. And when he returns a couple hours later, she's gone. How weird. So, on top of that, he really didn't look for her and then picked up Linda from work. When they pulled into home, and Roshanda wasn't there, her mom's like, well, all her stuff is still here, but the chores aren't done. And she was very good about leaving notes to say where she had gone. So they ate, they had sex, which is really significant because they almost never had sex. So what turned on John?
That somehow makes it like that much worse.
Oh, it's so much worse because she's like, he couldn't, in the documentary, she's like, he couldn't keep his hands off me because, yeah, they interviewed Linda. Oh, I feel bad for Linda because she lost a child, but then she's in denial about a lot of things.
I can imagine that'd be somewhat of a defense mechanism.
She's like, where is she? Where is she? And he's like, I don't know, but you have to wait 24 hours to call the police. She's 13. No, you don't. But Linda, good old Linda, just happy for security of a man in the 90s, was like, okay. And they play the 911 call. I'm not a fan of really listening to 911 calls or playing them, so I'm not going to. But basically, when she calls the dispatcher, the dispatcher was like, no, children, you don't have to wait 24 hours. And they start going through the process of asking about Roshanda, where last person to see her, all this stuff. And the police come out. Akroyd's not bothered that his stepdaughter's gone. He was not panicky, but he could know her weight and bra size, but couldn't remember her birthday.
Oh, wow.
Weird. It's almost like he knew that for some specific reason. He also noted that he thought she was pretty and noticed she had begun to develop, which is creepy. Never tell a girl she's developing. It doesn't sound right. No, thank you. Yeah, the police were like, this dude's acting weird, because he became sexually aroused when shown a pair of pants that the police had found in the woods and suspected belonged to Roshanda, and he loved the attention while he pretended to search for her.
Just the fact that they were able to notice that he got sexually aroused when they showed him the pants. I mean, just, imagining his behavior at that time that's something else.
He had a wet stain in his pants.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. I vomited a little bit when watching that documentary. So I was like, oh, God, why?
That's even worse than I imagined.
Yeah, no. Like, everyone who talks about him is like, why? He began to speculate, about the harm that had come to Roshanda, echoing the stories in Friday the 13th, Texas the Chainsaw Massacre, because he loved really gross horror movies where women were being chopped up. And it even made people who he invited over to watch movies get sick and leave, And
I can imagine it's more so probably how he was acting during them than so much, the movies.
Yeah, if you watch it once, it's whatever. But when he's rewinding it, and you're just like, I think this is a bit much. And he's like, no, we gotta watch it again, really see the art of it. And then you're just like, are you hard? No, thank you. Okay, bye. We're not friends anymore.
One too many wet stains.
Exactly. He even mentioned, like I said, investigators were troubled by his knowledge of her bra size. I don't think most men know women's bra size.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that troubled just about anyone.
Yeah, even if he knew his wife's bra size, because you're like, really? Most women don't know each other's bra sizes. They barely know their own. So, and then he also dwelled on the fact that she had gotten her period and things in the 90s that probably made the cops uncomfortable and were like, sir, no, please stop. On top of it, he said it was the girl's development that had drew a predator into the area.
So just telling them, his own reasons, just giving them insight.
It's like a poltergeist, she's like, she's becoming a woman. So a demon came and took her. Really, John? You saying an outside predator came and took her? You are? Okay. Seems creepily wrong, but okay. Ready for more horrible news?
Go right ahead.
He wondered aloud, quote, if Roshanda had been dumped and buried in the woods or threatened with a knife, tied up and gagged, and her body rolled in plastic, end quote. It sounds so familiar to his first victim, though. He threatened her with a knife.
It's like he literally can't think of anything other than what he himself has done. And that's like the only thing he can give the police.
Yeah, I know. And then on top of it, he's just talking to the police for hours. There's tapes. This is why it took this woman 2 years to get through it, because he talked so much to police. They basically just let him talk about it for hours with trying to hide how frustrated they were with Akroyd. He would tell them, quote, both of you sitting there pointing your fingers at me and I didn't do nothing, end quote. They'd ask him, you didn't do anything to Kayleen Jean Turner? No. You didn't do anything to Channing? No. You didn't do anything to anybody else? Nope. Quote, no, what do you think I am? A sadistic killer who goes around killing people, taking girls off somewhere? I did not do nothing. At the wrong time, wrong place, at the right time, end quote. And they're like, a bunch. And they're like, he's like, twice that we know of. Oh my God. It's just too coincidental. But again, at this period of time, there's no body. How do you get them? So they go back to Kayleen Turner and trying to figure out what's going on. So they actually get a breakthrough because the supervisor assigned a new detective, McNulty, to organize the press clippings from the early days of the investigation. You're like, this is kind of a rookie job, but he had only been promoted to detective 10 days earlier, and he's like, got it. And he's reading through the stories and all of that. But McNulty noticed that his hunting buddy, Beck, and his wife had lived in a trailer not far from Camp Sherman. Coincidence. And his wife, and Pam, Beck's wife, was around when the men were in the trailer that morning and had helped give Akroyd an alibi. But the couple had since divorced and Pam had moved back to California. Ex-wife, not the same as wife in the law. And he was like, hey boss, you think I can go to California? It's only 750 miles and talk to the ex-wife. What do you think the boss said?
Well, I'm trying to think of the most absurd situation. Did they say yes? Oh my God.
Yeah. So I don't know what McNulty did to convince his boss, but he drove that 750 miles. And I'm going to guess, depending on where he was located, it is either straight 5 or down the 101, which either one takes a while. Beck's ex-wife was like, I haven't talked to Akroyd, but it's pretty fond. They had been friends since they were in childhood. She knew when she was 12, Akroyd had actually tattooed his initials on her arm. And then, grossly, 2 years later at 14, she married Beck. Yeah. But she gave them some good news. The men ordered her to lie to the police where they were that morning. And she said, I lied like hell. So, yay! The truth was, on Christmas Eve morning, Akroyd showed up. The men left to poach deer, and did not return until the next day, at which point their clothes were covered with so much blood she had to get rid of Beck's jeans and t-shirt. Later, they told her that they had mistaken Kay for a deer and fatally shot her. She just lied to the police.
And did she help cover up? Just like blatantly lied?
Yeah. So she just said that they were there. And then she found out more. She found out that Kay had been raped and shot because Beck told Pam, basically threatening her probably when the marriage wasn't going well, he was gonna do to her exactly what they did to Kay Turner. Yeah. Gem of people. They're slowly working their way to Akroyd, and he had returned to Sweet Home, his hometown, to live with his mother after he split for good with Linda. Good for you, Linda. He had transferred out of Salem Junction, where he had been working because of, his stepdaughter going missing and everyone thinking he did it, and he was making women uncomfortable. He worked out of Corvallis and continued to work up and down Highway 20, but after he moved, he spotted the daughter of his old friend while he was driving, and he was introduced to 2 young women that he knew. They were Melissa Sanders, age 17, from Sweet Home, and Sheila Swanson, 19, from nearby Lebanon. They were restless, broke, and basically just living the life of drinking too much and keeping dangerous company. They would be at Sherry's in Lebanon, where basically teens and adults gathered to talk on CB radios and drink coffee, where Akroyd also hung out. And he made a point to talk to Melissa and Sheila. So while he's becoming friends with Melissa and Sheila, everyone's who's working the Turner case is focusing on Akroyd's shifting account, and basically getting ready to arrest him. So our next and final victims, Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson in Newport, Oregon in 1992, the year I was born.
So one moment, you said a second ago, I'm just trying to make sure I heard that right, that they hung out at this place and they drank coffee and talked over the CB radio. This was like a place that people hung out at?
Yeah, it was just basically like a coffee shop that you could hang out late at night. And they had CB radios there for some reason. And so people would like hang out and talk to truckers and like that kind of stuff.
Okay, so unironically, that sounds kind of amazing to me, actually. Just like a place late at night to drink coffee and talk to truckers on CB radio. Like, I would be so into that. Like, that actually sounds kind of amazing.
Right? It sounds great. Especially because think about for truckers, it's got to be amazing to have someone to talk to if you're driving late.
Well, I was looking into trucking at one point, and whenever I look into, something, I tend to do a deep dive. And of course that ended up with me looking into, CB radio and truckers. And apparently that era is over. Like they all use it makes sense when you think about it. They all use their cell phones. They're listening to audiobooks. They're, listening to podcasts. Exactly. They are. And so, they have ways to keep themselves, busy. So apparently the CB radio era is kind of gone. So that made me a little sad.
Dun dun. Yeah, I know. It's just sad because I've driven through Newport and it's amazing. It's a nice little beach town, and then like the fact that they were there and they had like their cool coffee bar that they went to, and they're like, well, let's go. So they were in I believe it's in Lebanon, and they wanted to go to the beach, which the beach in Oregon is not warm, but who doesn't love
I can imagine.
I'm assuming it's slightly warmer than the ocean in Washington, which was in the 50s, maybe 60s all year. So I'm going to guess it's like maybe 60. So they go out, they make their trip to Beverly Beach State Park, which, fun fact, all the beaches in Oregon are state-owned and are public. Useless fact that my friend gave me. You're welcome for that gem. Shout out to my old coworker Johnny for telling me this.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that, people can't live on them?
Yeah, so if you buy a house and there's a beach, that's not your beach. All the beaches are state-owned.
Oh, that's pretty nice. I think there's an issue in Florida they're having with that, where there's a lot of legal issues with that.
Yeah, my coworker went to visit all the lighthouses in the state of Oregon. He did it. I called him a nerd. But, so they head out to the coast, which I'm not going to lie, it's beautiful out there. But they grew bored, and they wanted their boyfriends to pick them up. And they call them from a payphone, aka the 90s. And
yeah,
their boyfriends were like, no, we're not going to come pick you up. So they're like, we're going to hitchhike. They had met only 6 months. The girls had met only 6 months earlier. And they had both shared a history infused with drugs and alcohol. Scrappy, streetwise high school dropouts. Both with some turbulent past, and they really bonded over evenings at Sherry's restaurants where they had hung around, and that's where they had met John.
Sound like some pretty cool people to hang out with, to be honest.
I know, right? So, they really didn't know about John's background when they had met him, where Sheila was the older of the two. She seemed younger, and she, just love this, she wore a black leather jacket that her parents had paid for on installments, where Melissa was the tough-talking independent one, and she really had just dragged Sheila along with her on her family vacation to Newport. Her parents had woken up to find the two women gone with their tent empty, and they assumed they had gotten a ride home from friends. But a week later, neither were in Sweet Home. Melissa wasn't there. Her father waited a couple more days before calling the police, later the FBI. They reached out to the police in Lebanon, and Sheila wasn't there either. And mind you, even though it's rural Oregon, now I know at least the cops really, they talk to each other. They're all in the same radio, basically radio system. So if State Highway Patrol has something happening, park rangers now, the local police now, they're all helping each other out. I don't know if this is what it was like in the 90s, but I know from working in Washington, that's how Washington runs, and Washington and Oregon are very similar in their functioning that way.
I can imagine that, yeah, you saw a lot of changes by the 90s because, if you take your time and you look into like murder rate, 70s and 80s, it's off the charts. And then by the 90s, I think it's a mixture of, police becoming more effective and then public awareness as well. Because you mentioned it before, but I mean, people used to just hitchhike left and right and just fall asleep in people's cars when they're hitchhiking and everything else. And I think shows like Unsolved Mysteries kind of told people like, look, you have a right to do whatever you want. It's your right, and you should be able to do what you want. It's not your fault, but the reality of it is that there are some very bad men out there, and they're willing to take advantage of you. And and I think a lot of that public awareness helped quite a lot.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, like, if you think about it, hitchhiking, is it dangerous? Yes. But then again, we have Uber, which is alertive hitchhiking. We summon someone in our car.
At least in the case of that, you're pretty much setting up, like, an Uber driver isn't going to they're not going to get away with killing you. I mean, yes, you could still get in the vehicle of someone that's having like a psychotic break, sure. But, if there's someone that's wanting to get away with killing someone, Uber's not the way to go because there's the trail for the police to catch them, right away. In the 70s and 80s, I mean, just getting into the, any old beat up pickup or, any old truck driver, any old truck driver's truck, it was just a complete gamble with no trail at all. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I used to hitchhike a lot as a teenager, and this was before I had a cell phone. So, I mean, I'm completely guilty of it.
I think the worst I've ever done, I never hitchhiked, but I've ridden in the back of a minivan in the trunk. That's probably the worst for that. Oh, my dad used to let us ride in the back of the truck.
Oh, and it was like a friend's minivan?
Yeah, we did carpooling for a swim team, so, like, there were too many people in the car. And mind you, this was probably not the mom you wanted to drive you when there's too many people in the car, because we were going back roads through Cleveland, but it was really hilly and stuff. But my sister, as soon as she did it once, and she's like, you're never riding back there. You have to hold this is how bad it was. So there's like a minivan, the two and the three, and then there's two people in the back. But then people also were holding younger kids on their laps. It was bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny about the holding younger people on their laps. I still unbelievably see that today in Florida.
The only reason it was bad is because where I lived in Cleveland was really hilly. So, like, snowy. So if something happened, it was not going to end well, and this lady was a crazy driver. Good thing I know no one in my family listens to this. So, around the time that the teens went missing, Marvin Laron had been working the graveyard shift at the State Highway Patrol shop in Sweet Home, which again is, I don't know why I didn't mention it. It's a great name for a town. Where are you going? Sweet Home. And that's where, basically workers come in, they park their personal cars, get a state rig to go drive around, so you're not putting all that miles on your car. While Laurent and a coworker were sitting in their seats, like talking about their plans for the night ahead, they noticed that Akroyd's truck was still parked outside and his work rig wasn't there, which meant he was working unusually late. Then they heard his truck pull into the yard. Weird, because, if you're working, like, third shift, you're not expecting people to come in. And it turned out to be Akroyd. He comes in, his shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his arms and hands were covered with dried blood. You want to guess the excuse?
Deer poaching. I mean, come on. This guy with deers, this is like the fourth time. Like, this guy could have gotten away with anything. He could have stolen, anything he wanted and just said it was deer poaching.
Oh my god, yeah, he said he ran into a deer. It was just a t-shirt. It was a deer. Not murder, just a deer.
Yeah. He could have been in like a human suit and said it was deer poaching.
He could have been doing Human Centipede and said it was deer.
Yeah.
He said, I ran into a deer, I had to cut him out. To which Laurent asked him, like, okay, where's the deer? Akroyd, great excuse. I threw the deer carcass into the brush. I'm sorry, you gutted him, then threw him into the brush? Just take the deer at that point. You've already beat the deer. They were both like, okay, I guess. And they watched him wash up and leave for home. And they basically, everyone in the shop was like, Akroyd's a bit weird. He said he killed a deer, but we never saw the deer. But
that was like the third time this month.
I know, he keeps hitting these deer and getting all bloody, but not taking the deer. Who's to say? Then, in the fall, they hear that hunters found the bodies of 2 young women who had vanished during a camping trip on the coast in the woods. They had been dumped off the highway along Akroyd's route from the coast to Sweet Home. Coincidence? Probably not. Yeah, it was not a deer, sadly. So Sheila's ankles were bound by her leggings. Her sneakers and socks were still on her feet. Poor lady. They discovered a used rivet near her body because the investigators suspected that this rivet was a link to her killer, which was a quick fix in field repairs, had fallen out of the pocket of her attacker. Melissa's body, unfortunately, was nude and had been dragged away by animals. They had been strangled, but again, they had been so far decomposed at that point. And Laurent was like, light bulb. He came back late that night, covered in blood, but only weeks after the teens had disappeared, Akroyd had been arrested for Kay's murder and booked into the Jefferson County Jail in Madras. I think I pronounced that the Portuguese way, but who's to say? And the detectives were like, did he kill any more before we caught him? But of course, Akroyd had been telling friends about the missing teens. They assume it's me. Stop telling people that. Keep telling them it's a deer.
That was his grand mistake. He didn't stick to the deer defense, which is, everyone knows is Ironclad.
Ironclad deer defense. It was a deer. I've hit several deer. It is terrifying. And they are very large. I don't recommend it. It fucks up your car. Except for, I will give an endorsement to one car that it did not fuck up, was my Chevy Venture. It just took off the license plate, and my father was very impressed.
Yeah, I've told my wife that. She's lived in Florida, her entire life. And I've had to explain to her in the past that hitting deer is a very, real reality for a large portion of the country. And like how, people down here, they view them, like Bambi or whatever, but they can be such a pain in other states. I
have almost hit 3 different types of deer because I've driven so much. Which you asked me, you're like, what time zone are you in now? And I was like, I'm in Eastern for right now. Who's to say in like a year? I could move again. We don't know. Yeah, I've hit white-tailed deer. I've almost hit black-tailed deer, and I've almost hit a mule deer. Actually, no, my friend was driving, so I didn't almost hit it. My friend almost hit a mule deer in my car, but that was in Utah, so. They're all very large and really would fuck up your car. Life lesson, don't hit deer. On top of the police arresting Akroyd for Kay's murder, they are trying to connect him to Melissa and Sheila, because they're missing. He knows them. They know that. They also know he's a motherfucker. So, they also have earlier police interrogations, hours of tape on Kayleen Turner and Rashonda Pickle, but he was silent on Melissa and Sheila, probably because he knew he's fucked. They go, hey, can we interview him? And Akroyd's lawyer goes, that's a no. So, they look at his work truck. He would park, he would drive around in his state rig, and they brought up the point where he's like, hey, you showed up late once with your arms covered in blood, but still, again, no physical evidence, because he washed off that blood. He said it was a deer. It's the deer defense.
Ironclad
Deer defense. On top of that, like I said, the teens had built up a varied circle of people in their lives, so there was plenty of violent young men to consider who murdered them, which is terrifying because Melissa apparently stole some glassware from a local meth cook. Again, who's to say? And it would take 2 decades to figure it out, in which time Sheila's parents would have died, and her younger brother had to carry on trying to figure out. Melissa's mother had died, and this is kind of touching. Melissa's father, Richard Sanders, kept her jewelry box, which looked like a miniature china cabinet, with him in his home in Sweet Home. So between 1984 through 1995, 5 teens had actually disappeared on or around the highways in Lincoln County. So it wasn't just them, and the local district attorney decided to reopen their cases in 2012 to identify potential suspects. So this falls to Ron Benson, the investigator for the district attorney, and Linda Snow, a retired legal assistant. So they have to go through all the old files on top of the mountains of clues, and they located the woman who had introduced Melissa and Sheila to Akroyd, and she remembers telling them stories and that the women were comfortable with him enough to climb into her truck. What I didn't tell you about the fun things when they were at Sherry's coffee bar and CB radio thing is they had, from the documentary, they talk about the interesting nickname that they had for Akroyd. You want to guess the nickname?
The deer hunter?
No. The perv!
Oh, okay. That works too.
Yeah, because they all kind of knew he was a perv, which, just, why would you get in the car with him? I'm sorry. Then again, I've done some stupid things, but I always have a backup plan. It's called having a toolbox in your car, ladies. Do it. It's a life choice. Actually, that was my father's decision. He gave me 2 toolboxes. But, and really, they had found out from other people who hung out at Sherry's that Akroyd really didn't start hanging out there until he had met Sheila and Melissa, so creepy. He found out that they were going to Newport, and he said, I'm gonna host a party because I have a house there. Come on down. It'll be right by the campgrounds, which is fair. There are a lot of campgrounds in Oregon and Washington. They're pretty close to major towns, but still, that's a big nope from me. And some workers had told the investigators that they had seen Akroyd around the highway project near the gravel logging road off of Highway 20, and it wasn't that far from where they found their remains. But Akroyd was spotted there 3 times, at least after they went missing, so good to know he's continuing to visit the bodies. On top of that, when they were going through the evidence found when they had discovered the bodies, they found the rivet and the beaded seat cushion bead that had been used in cars and trucks at that time. So they are talking to the highway workers, because, you know, if you work for a state agency and you're in a certain area, you tend to know most people you work with. I've worked with a state agency. You tend to know most people in your area, if not by sight, by which car they drive, like around the area and stuff like that. And they were like, you know what? We carry these rivets all the time. It's like probably the one that someone buys in bulk and you just grab a couple and go on. So they could have been in Akroyd's rig. And as for the seat cover, most workers use them to keep cool in the summer months. If you're driving between the coast and the center, it's cool on the coast and it's hot in the center part of the state.
I feel like you don't see those beaded seat covers too much anymore. If I see them anymore, it's usually like an older lady. But other than that, I don't really see beaded seat covers.
Do you think it's people who drive a lot? Because, you know, you're sitting a lot in your car and they kind of massage your back. I've never had one.
You know, thinking about it now, I don't think I've ever sat in a beaded seat cover.
I don't think I have either. I'm trying to think. I know I've never really sat with seat covers. Then again, I've never actually picked my own car. So my parents don't have seat covers. My sister, the only covers I have for my car are for dogs. So that's not fair to judge. Okay, so we have the rivet that was probably state issued, you know, like that's just what the kind the state bought. And then a lot of state employees had the beaded seat cover. So it could be in his car. Then they did a murder board, which is my favorite thing. So they got a big whiteboard and they're like, we're going to connect. We're going to pull a Charlie Day. We're going to have a crazy conspiracy theory whiteboard to John Akroyd. Let's go. And after 4 years, Snow and Benson had actually brought enough evidence to take the double murder to the grand jury. You ready for this theory?
Does it involve deer?
It does not involve deer. Melissa and Sheila had waited until dawn to leave their family's campsite. They had begun walking along the US 101, which is the highway that follows up and down the U.S. coast from Washington, actually from California all the way up into British Columbia. And they covered more than 6 miles till the Highway 20. Damn girls, working it. Then turned east. They met Akroyd, who was going to Newport for work that day. He had encountered the teens somewhere along the highway, offered them a lift like he had done previously, drove them up into a logging road and into the woods, and had murdered them. This makes his count up to known murders 4. Mind you, that's known murders.
Yeah, considering how long he was active, that seems way too low.
Yes, it does. So, 1993, we're reading John's life story in Madras, Oregon. So in late 1993, he sat calmly in a courtroom in downtown Madras, about an hour's drive from where Kay disappeared. They know he was an opportunist who preyed on women and he had worked for more than a decade as a state mechanic along Highway 20 from the Cascade foothills to the coast. You know, Kay's mother attended. Her father, who was shattered by the loss of his only child, didn't actually live long enough to see this case concluded. The jurors are attentively writing their notes. Akroyd refused to testify, but they did get to hear about the forensic testing on Kay's clothing, which had shown that she'd been shot and stabbed, and prosecutors also determined that she had been raped. They had a witness who was a young woman who was also running that day in Cape Sherman. But the runner, J.A. Morris, had an earlier brush with Akroyd as well, months before Kate had gone missing. She was 24 then, on her bicycle, headed home from her waitressing job, and noticed that Akroyd had been standing near his pickup along the road in Camp Sherman. He then turned and pointed his handgun at her and ordered her to stop. Jane bravely crouched over her handlebars and sped away, zigzagging, unlike Bran Stark, towards the country store.
You know, I've told my wife that when you look into you see that a lot. I've told her, like, if you're ever at the bank and somebody points a gun at you and tells you to get out of the car, you just drive off. If he shoots you, I mean, whatever. But your chances of survival are just so much better to just get going. Because if they get a hold of you, if they get you out of the vehicle, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, like, you're in a 1,000-ton vehicle. You can get away. You know, if you get shot, you're not gonna, like, don't let them take control. I drive a lot. I think about these things way too much. But yeah, no, like, she did the exactly right thing. It was like, and the crazy thing is they interview her in this documentary, and she's like, I zigzagged because I had heard that it's harder to hit you if you zigzag. And I'm like, you did the bravest thing you could think. And she was like, I was petrified that I was going to hear the truck behind me. And she's in this courtroom Jane's in this courtroom facing Akroyd for the first time since that summer morning where he had almost shot her. And she realizes how lucky so we have two people who have escaped him, basically. And as they're waiting, as trial comes to a close, Akroyd, who's in cowboy boots, jeans, and a studded belt with John in silver letters, waits for the jury to come back. How long do you think they took? Actually, 4 hours?
An hour.
Well, think about it. They don't have a lot of physical evidence, so you got to debate a little bit more. Jane?
Oh, man. I went too low. I hoped, I forgot her name, but the woman who zigzagged, yeah. I hope in that moment when she was staring him down, I hope she felt a sense of, pride and even power over him because, I mean, I haven't heard the verdict yet, but I'm going to assume he was guilty.
Yes, he was.
I hope that she felt, she defeated this man because I would assume that her testimony provided a lot of that evidence, against him because, that's a pretty incredible story and you don't hear that a lot in a lot of these true crime stories that not only did she evade him, but she stared him down like that. So
even though he was guilty and we have other collaborating character witnesses who's no, this is the man who tried to kill me. This is the man who raped me. He would never admit what happened. So they don't actually know what happened to Kay that morning. But, his buddy Beck, who was Akroyd's alibi, another jury found Beck guilty in the murder of Kay's case, too. Because Beck, the dumbass that he is, bragged to family members about killing Kay. And they both received life sentences.
Nice happy ending.
They actually did reenactments, and I didn't want to go into this, of what they thought happened the morning of Kay's murder. And I'll link to the documentary. I'll share it on all the social medias for that, so you can watch all of this and get your cup of rage refilled. On top of it, Kay and Rashonda never really got their ending because they don't know what happened to them. And Akroyd never was charged in the case, but, everyone didn't really think that his story about inviting her to go photograph wildlife made sense. And he really seemed to relish in the speculation of the horrible things that happened to her. Well, Mike Harmon, who is an investigator for Lynn County Sheriff's Office, was really concerned that Akroyd might get a shot at parole. So, the smart man he was, he arranged to meet with Akroyd at Oregon's maximum security prison in Salem, which is the capital, in the fall of 2012. So we've made it from 1977 to 2012. Covered a lot of time. And, you know, he's just trying to figure out if Akroyd's coming up for parole. He's got diabetes, a bad heart. He's like, I'm going to be a burden on my family. As if your family will take you. So Harmon's bringing the conversation back to Rashonda. And, you know, he's taking out pictures from the original police file. Akroyd's now 63, and he goes over the same timeline, lying his ass off. And, you know, Harmon tries to, be like, you can go home for Thanksgiving, we can organize a visit or something. Doesn't work. So he comes back for a second time, and he tells Akroyd, quote, I work for Shani. Something bad happened to her. The prosecution is going to progress on this, end quote. Akroyd's still not willing to talk. He's claiming he's innocent. He's going to keep talking about it till he dies. So Harmon goes back to his office and thinks about all the cases that are unsolved from the 1970s on. Bodies or clothes of women and one young man found in the wilderness of Lynn County off of Highway 20. There are 2 Jane Does, and another young woman from Lebanon, Elizabeth Musler, who disappeared when she was 22 and discovered in a shallow grave. 2 more teens disappeared, but their bodies never turned up. Then Karen Lee and Rodney Grissom, 15 and 14 respectively, were friends. They ran away from home and planned to go to California. They sent their last call in the spring of 1977 from a payphone in Lebanon. Sadly, later, Karen's jeans, some pages from her journal, and the blouse she had sewn for a school project were found off a logging road. Her jeans had appeared to be cut, similar to Akroyd's 2 earlier assaults, Marlene Gabrielson's and Kayleen Turner's. Meanwhile, Karen's mother, Violet Gilmore, believed that Akroyd was her daughter's killer. She knew that about the abduction of Kayleen Turner. She also knew he was from Sweet Home, and it was not far from where Karen had called a friend 1 year before Kayleen Turner had died. So all these cases were all but forgotten. No physical evidence had been found to link Akroyd to any of them, but their timing and proximity to Highway 20 had prompted investigators to wonder, could it be Akroyd? So Hammond takes another shot. He's like, what about the other ones? Akroyd denies. He's like, you're trying to pin these on me. He refers to Rashonda, thinking maybe he'll tell her where the body's at. And he says, quote, so you don't know where she's at? Is that what you're saying? End quote. Akroyd refuses and leaves and returns to his cell. Only a few months later, in 2013, Lynn County District Prosecutor took Rashonda's case to the Grand Prosecutors. They don't have a body. They don't have any physical evidence. But they're worried about the parole of Akroyd because he's still considered a danger. Think about how much damage he's done. We only know of 4, but there's probably at least 10 that you can think of. They had concluded that Rashonda's dead, and they had a Forest Service ranger's account of seeing Akroyd that day in a snow park near Santam Junction, hours later than Akroyd claimed that had exploded his alibi. On top of it, they had her friends saying that Akroyd had sexually abused her before she had vanished. But who else could have done it, you know? So what do you think the grand jury returned with?
I'm gonna hope guilty.
An indictment on a single count, murder. And he pleaded no contest. He wouldn't admit to killing her. He wouldn't say no, but he agreed to never seek parole, which, I mean, in this case, that's all you can hope for. So, unfortunately, he never gave up where her body was. We still don't know.
A lot of these guys, I mean, even if they have the death penalty, they'll just take it to them. They'll just take it with them to their grave. You know, like Oba Chandler, you know, he had more victims and they were finding him, you know, after he was already sentenced to death, but he just would never, you know, give them up for whatever reason. They just didn't want to admit just how awful they were.
I think in this case, it's his one thing he has over her still, you know, I
always wonder about that. I always wonder if it's like, is this, you know, power for them? Or is this some type of, you know, cognitive dissonance in which, you know, day to day to get through life, they try to distance themselves from like the monsters they are? Or is it, yeah, like you said, is it this thing where this is like, you know, his power over them? Does this sexually arouse him or whatever?
Yeah. the worst thing I think is Rashonda's father didn't come to this hearing. Only her brother did. And you hear from him talking about testifying, doing victim impact statements for it too. And the most touching thing, he didn't really get closure, but he got this beautiful tattoo on his arm of Rashonda from family pictures, which I'll be sharing, at least on Facebook. That's where I put all the pictures. But so because she was a minor, the judge sealed the court records, and the Oregonian actually had to contest and have them open to conclude this document. And I'm glad they did. So they had the investigators had built a case for Akroyd killing Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson. But because he had already agreed to never apply for parole and he had a life sentence, he was going to die in jail, they considered the case closed to save money. In late December of, I believe it was 2013. I lost track of my time in this, but yeah, 2013. In December, Akroyd was dead. The cause, heart disease. I don't know if this makes you feel better, but the state continued to pay his pension while he was in jail. It was $3,624 monthly because he was a public employee, and that was his pension. He had stuffed himself full of food from the prison commissary, dozens of packages of processed meats and cheeses, probably not deer, candy bars and beans. But he had chronic health problems, so he didn't leave his cell much. Tellingly, his confidants were a pair of child molesters serving long prison sentences.
So he died of his own gluttony.
Yeah, basically his heart gave out. And I really suggest you to watch the documentary, dear listeners, they end the documentary going back to Marlene Gabrielson, and her story broke my heart just watching her tell it. But then at the end, Noelle Crombie wraps it up very nicely by saying, quote, "Victims of sexual assault often ask to remain anonymous. They don't want the stigma and shame associated with these crimes. Marlene K. Gabrielson wants you to remember her name. She told the truth all along. It's 41 years too late, but she is finally believed," end quote. So whenever people ask you why victims of sexual assault don't come forward, she was humiliated and all of that. And her rapist killed at least 4 other women. So there's a reason why sexual assault victims, male or female, don't report, and it has a consequence. And I want you, if anything, to remember, even though this is a heavier case, to remember Marlene Gabrielson. Remember that she tried to warn everyone.
And I had a bit of a rant at one of my recent episodes where basically I was talking about how there are certain large podcasters out there that they rail against, supposed SJWs and keyboard warriors and people of that nature. And I basically said my opinion on that is that things have gotten so much better since people have been able to speak out so easily. People have a platform in which they can say that, hey, this is wrong, or this happened to me and it was wrong. And, we're in this time where your voice can be louder than ever, but you still have these people that try to silence that. And I mean, when you just look back to, even like the 90s, the amount of just awfulness that was going on, where just these horrible acts were happening to people. And,
you could just look at the Supreme Court rape, the rapists who both of them got in, but if you look at the questions to their accusers, they're completely different.
And I think what's happening is that there's a lot of societal progress that's happening right now, and it's moving at a breakneck speed compared to previous decades. And there are some people that they can't handle that. They want to exist in what's essentially the old world where, hey, it was one big frat party, and if you were in the club, you were fine. But, if you were an outsider or if you were a lesser victim, then, hey, you're not in the club, so we don't care, and you were ostracized and made fun of. And if you were a rape victim, they didn't care. And yeah, there's a lot of people that don't like these changes that are happening, but I think it's long, long, long overdue. And it's very interesting that it just so happens to be happening in a time where, hey, even you poor, no matter what race you are, no matter what gender you are, your voice is just as loud as anyone else's.
I think it's fantastic, and I want it to continue. So think about that as we move on to the next topic. Justin, do you want to do some plug-in? Yeah, go for it.
Okay, my show is Obscura, a true crime podcast. We are similar to a lot of other big true crime podcasts out there that are produced with, real audio and a narrative structure, but there are some distinctions. It's told in a very campfire style. There's an emphasis on respect for the victims. And if you're into that kind of thing, check us out. We have episodes that are 30 minutes long. We have episodes that are 90 minutes long. And it does get graphic at times, though. Despite having that core philosophy of respecting the victims, there are some episodes that are rougher than others, but we try to warn in advance for that kind of thing. So, yeah, check out Obscura, True Crime Podcast.
It's amazing. I'm not going to lie. I listen every week. So we'll see you next week, devotees. And Justin will be telling his story, which I'm sure it'll be a doozy, because you always find the best, I'm going to put best with quotes because it's true crime, topics. So we'll see you next week. Bye.
Hello all, I'm Paul, creator and host of the True Crime Enthusiast podcast. I've been a crime buff for many years now, and my enthusiasm has led its way here. If you fancy each week delving into some obscure but in-depth and often disturbing true crime tales from the shores of the UK, plus you don't mind the northern accent and the down-to-earth manner, then why not come have a nosy? The show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much wherever you get your podcasts from. So it'd be great if you guys could come and have a look-see, and I hope you can subscribe today. I'd love you to join me, and I look forward to seeing you there too. See if you can become enthusiastic about the True Crime Enthusiast podcast.
Thank you for listening to The Cult of Domesticity. We are available on all podcatchers. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at The Domestic Podcast, and Instagram at The Cult of Domesticity. If you have a topic request, information, or want to send us a recipe, please email us at thedomesticpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe and share with all your friends. Remember to stay domestic and cult-free.